Mr. Cage's thought of the day. Some of us do not progress because we worship traditions. When I say progress, I am not referring to the accumulation of material or immaterial. Material being physical touch, house, property, cars, money. Immaterial, no physical presence, titles, degrees, etc., etc. I am not talking about progress in that way. I'm speaking about progressing in who I am according to my purpose and my destiny. We're talking about your personal growth and development as a human, your internal characteristics. We're not speaking external, we're focusing on the internal. I first want to give a definition of tradition to keep everything in right context. Traditions can be defined as beliefs or practices handed down from generation to generation. Cage, how do I define or how do I identify if I'm not progressing? How do I identify when I'm worshiping a tradition? Easy breezy. You can determine if you're worshiping the tradition if the people that you are connected to are not being liberated. If I'm not liberated, my mentor says it takes a free man to free a man. It takes a free human to free a human. If any person that you have close interaction with on a consistent basis is bound, they don't understand who they are, or you, me, are bound, rigid, fearful, having tremendous amount of anxiety, we know in our being that we should be doing other things. This is how we know when we worship in tradition. On the other end, sometimes even when we interact with individuals and he or she or a group don't receive, it doesn't necessarily mean that we're bound or worshiping tradition. That person or group may be misprocessing the information that's being given, but that can be considered as an indicator. Let me give you this thought in connection with that statement and the thought of the day. Some of us don't progress because we worship traditions. Historically, people come together to share ideas, best practices, methods, processes, and to create documentation and entities to influence a way of life. Hashtag power shift. If we do our research and go through our history, we will find a thread in history and a principle that reflects people coming together to create systems, documentation that shifts the leverage of power to a group of people. And what that equates to is people that operate in the system being arrested, being bound, not being liberated. The people that find themselves in these random systems because we may not be doing enough study, historical study, identifying the origin of how did this start and how did this begin? Because some of us will say that we need to know history so history doesn't repeat itself. My thought is that we need to know history so we can reinvent, reimprove, or rebuild the system to benefit everybody. So that's general. That general statement could go many places. but it comes from a place where people find themselves worshiping traditions. Because when I worship a tradition, without doing my research as to the origin of how this started, I become safe. And not all traditions are counterproductive, but some are. And the counterproductive traditions are identified when we are stuck, we lack progression in the expression of who we are, not necessarily externally. Sometimes worship a tradition can keep a person bound externally to that specific job that that individual has that does not allow them to really live. It doesn't allow them to live the way comfortably that they're supposed to. I'm gonna live off $15 an hour. I'm gonna live off $13 an hour. But when we set a pattern of living and it becomes so staunch and set in concrete and we become safe, we know that we camped out at a tradition. Let me give you this last thought, which will, so we've identified when we worship traditions, and I've given you some historical reference for you to go and look back and identify different events in history that confirm a group of individuals coming together create systems documentation to influence the pathway of those which the founding people worship a tradition, and then they push that to the individual that it was supposed to serve, and we got saved, worship a tradition, and become stuck. Last statement. We subscribe. We subscribe to some traditions so firmly that when a pathway of freedom reveals itself, we don't believe it to be true. So this tradition that I have, but I'm making it general because I want you to take it and apply it in your life where you see fit. I subscribe to doing this every year. And when something else new or somebody else new comes before me, I cannot identify it because I've come so comfortable with doing this, saying this, hanging around these group of people that I miss out on an opportunity when the pathway of freedom connected to the opportunity is revealing itself. It doesn't even sound right for me to say to you that a person, male or female, or a group of people are okay with living in prison. We would think that if I was in prison and I got freed, I would be happy. But when we are conditioned to live a certain way and we internalize that condition, it becomes a part of who we are. We become stuck and worship the tradition of being in prison, and we don't know how to live when we experience freedom or when freedom is knocking at our door.